Hello. So I had told myself throughout the summer that starting September 1st, I had to start my revisions on The Animal Sense, which is the book formerly known as Saltbirds. I was trying to keep the new title a secret, but I kept just accidentally referring to it as The Animal Sense. The new title has really solidified in my brain. I like it way more. I've been kind of putting it off over the past couple months. Like, I think it was back in July that I was reading the book and doing my edits. There's just one thread of the book that I don't really know what I'm gonna do with. I'm weighing whether or not I need to cut this subplot, but I think I'm just not gonna worry about it for now. I'm going to just do all the other edits I have planned that are really clear, and then probably in my next draft address this issue. I think at a certain point you have to accept that you can't fix everything in one draft, especially in this case where that thing is, it's like the most separate of all the subplots, which is why I'm like, this either needs to be much better integrated into the story or it just needs to go. Doing all the other edits first will make it easier to focus on that one edit to this other subplot in the next draft, because all the other mess will be cleared up, or at least hopefully a lot of it will be. I've gotten through the first chapter, really no big edit to it. It was just kind of reading it over, but I was actually really happy with a lot of the edits that I made to the language. One of my goals for this draft is really to focus on the prose. Compared to Honey, Vinegar, and Holding a Ghost, I'm less enamored with the prose line level writing than I was in those books. I think in those books I was so proud of the prose and the line level, even on the first draft. Here, you know, there are little pockets of brilliance, I think, like little moments where I love it, but I think overall the voice is not as developed as I would like it to be. I just feel like linguistically it doesn't shine as much as I would like. I really love other elements of the book. I think the relationship work is maybe the best I've ever done. So on a character and idea and relationship level, I'm really excited about it, but I think that that's not fully being expressed in the voice the way that I would like. I mean, the voice, there's a lot that I like about the voice. I think it's very tonally rich. I think the prose needs more sparkle, like, if that makes sense. And I'm really pleased with some of the adjustments that I made, the little tweaks that I made to it. Small things, but I think they made a big difference in that first chapter that I felt like started to hone in on these little sparkles in the voice that weren't really there. I think are really making it pop in the way that it should, and that's reflective of the story that I'm trying to tell and the character. Making the voice a little weirder, a little more electric, just really creating that movement, that intensity in the language is something that I'm really focused on, and it was easy to do, especially in that first chapter, because there weren't any big changes I wanted to make for the first chapter, so it was pretty easy to just really focus on the line level. You know, until the end of the year, I think my only focus is going to be this and some Holding a Ghost edits potentially. Holding a Ghost is currently with my agent. For the rest of the year, I think I'm basically just going to focus on probably alternating drafts of this book and Holding a Ghost. I don't know how many more drafts Holding a Ghost will need. I've already done a lot of drafts of that book myself, but there's probably going to be at least some revision, obviously. I don't think I'm going to do a NaNoWriMo or anything this year. I've been doing NaNoWriMo the past few years, but I think I'm just way too busy. My line level and getting the voice to where I'd like, because I think the voice in this book really has its moments, but I also think it's not fully developed like the way that I felt about the voice in Honey, Vinegar, and Holding a Ghost. Is that by the time I finished the book, I was super, super proud of the voice and where it was at. Whereas with this book, I feel like it has some really great moments, but I just feel like it's not quite there. But I'm really happy with what I did to the voice in chapter 1, and I feel like it gave me, like, I feel like I tapped into something important with the voice that I was looking for that was kind of already there, but I think I kind of lifted it up in the way that I wanted. So I'm hoping that I can continue to do that for the rest of the book. It was easy to do that in chapter 1 because chapter 1 was probably the cleanest chapter in the book. I'd edited it multiple times. It didn't need anything large scale, so it was easy to just really focus on the voice. But it may be harder in some of the later chapters that are a lot messier, and so it's harder to focus on the micro edits when they need like more of an overhaul. Welcome to today's update. I have edited up to the end of chapter 7. I actually had a really productive day yesterday. I had a commute on the ferry there and back for a little day trip because I had a date. Yes. Oh, there's like so many mushrooms. Oh my god. The ground is just sprouted with mushrooms. These weren't here last time I was here. I guess it's because it's been raining. Okay. So I feel like I've really gotten into the flow with these edits. I feel like I kind of forgot, but this is also, it makes sense because I feel like this happens every time I do a draft. The first few chapters are kind of slow. Like, it was taking me like 3 days to edit a chapter. I feel like once I get into the groove, it starts moving a lot faster. The end of part 2 out of 6 parts, I've talked at length about my issues with part 2. It's always been the problem child. It was the part that I was really struggling to write, but editing it back, it was fine. I think I didn't really notice a decrease in quality, which I think is a good sign that I did some good work with it on the previous draft in order to kind of get it more up to par. My only worry with part 2 is that maybe it's a little too slow, which if I'm noticing that might be a sign, because I think one thing that I struggle to notice in my own work, I think I'm usually pretty good at diagnosing my own work and editing my work on my own, even before feedback. Like, I will do very extensive edits before I even send a book off for the first round of feedback. Like, I get feedback pretty late in the process. That's how I've grown to like to work. One thing that I do as a trend struggle to notice in my work is when it's a bit too slow. And I think it's because, to me, the slow parts of the book don't feel slow. Like, they're exciting to me. If I'm feeling like this part is a little too slow, that may be a sign that it needs some condensing. I'll address that more on my next draft. I'm gonna just keep moving forward, and then, you know, on the next draft, come back and address anything lingering that I have. There's one subplot in the book that I've talked about. I still don't know what I'm gonna do with that. It's a busy fall for me. I've been, you know, also having just some health issues recently. Edits on the book are going well, and I think I'm nicely into the flow, and the middle of the book is like my favorite part. There's like a lot of really juicy plot developments throughout the middle that I'm really excited about to just read over again. The problem areas for me were part 2 and the ending, which I like a lot of the ending, but I think like the ending, like last scene, I don't think is right. But I can't but anyways, I'm not there yet. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I'm back in the Gulf Island, pretty close to it on the draft. I am near the end of part 5, so I'm on chapter 17, which is the last chapter in part 5, and then I have the 4 chapters in part 6, and they're all quite short, mostly because they're all pretty underwritten. I've had mixed feelings about this draft. There have been points where I felt like I was really, really improving it, and there have also been points where I felt a little disappointed and felt like the edits that I'm making, not the edits themselves, but that the draft overall is not as impactful as I would like. I feel like the stuff that was kind of mediocre, I've made way better, but the stuff that wasn't working still kind of isn't working. At a certain point, I had to accept that this book is going to require several very intensive rounds of developmental editing rather than just like one really intensive round and then a few lighter rounds, because in my past few books I've done like one huge round of developmental editing that was really intensive, and then I still did do other rounds of developmental editing, but they weren't as intense. There have been similarities in the process across all 3, but also huge differences just because all of the books were challenging in different ways. And I think with this one, funny enough, when I started it, I told myself it was going to be easy to write. Ha ha ha, how did that go? I remember thinking it doesn't have any of the stuff that my last 2 books had that made it challenging. It doesn't have a historical setting that's going to require a ton of research. The main character doesn't have any really specialized skills that are going to require a ton of research. It's going to be set only in places that I've been to. It doesn't have any like experimental formative stuff, and the character is not like, you know, holding a ghost. I think it was hard because the characters were really subtle people. They weren't very extreme characters, and I usually find more extreme characters a lot easier to write than really subtle ones. So I was like, this should be the easiest book to write. It's not. I think this is the lie I tell myself before every book I start. I tell myself, oh, this one's gonna be easy. I'm gonna give myself a break. It's never easy. I think I just have to accept that this book is gonna require several rounds of detailed developmental editing and a lot more feedback to get it in place. You know, with my last book, I got that book to the point that I was happy with it without any feedback. It was doing what I wanted it to do. It was saying what I wanted it to say. It all felt in place. And so then when I sent it off for feedback, it wasn't a, I can get this in place, help me. It was more of a, this is doing what I want, is that conveying kind of question, you know? And normally that's when I like to get feedback. I like to do as much work as I can on the book myself. I don't like to have too many voices in my head when I'm editing. Get feedback when I'm happy with the work, and then I can find out if it's conveying, and then if it's not conveying, then I can fix it. But I feel like I need that touchstone of feeling secure in what the story is doing and saying before I get feedback, so then I can edit accordingly. It's kind of hard for me to edit from feedback if I'm still a little unclear on what I want from the story or what the story is meant to be saying. With this book though, I think I'm gonna need feedback not just at the, hey, this is doing what I want, now can you tell me if it's conveying stage. I think this needs feedback at the,
this is not doing what I want. This is not necessarily saying what I want, and I need help getting it there stage. Some aspects of this draft have not been as impactful as I would want. I feel like there are still some really big problem areas. Most of the book I think is doing great. Like, I really have made great strides with a lot of elements of the story, but there are just a few aspects that I feel like are massive glaring issues. My plan is to finish this draft, then on the next draft go back and do this massive edit that I realized I had to do about halfway through this draft, where I have to cut a whole thread for the book. It's gonna be a pain. And in most cases, I think I can just condense by cutting that, but there are a few places where I'm gonna need to replace it with something else, and I don't even know what yet. Like, I'm gonna need to replace that causal beat with a causal beat that I guess ties into one of the other threads in the book, but can serve the same purpose in like the overall narrative. It may need then another draft of line and scene work throughout the whole book. The draft has been a little iffy in some ways, but also in other ways, I have been really thrilled. Yesterday, I actually had one of the best writing days I've had with this book in a really long, well, I had a lot of great writing days on the first draft, but I had a really great day of writing in a way that it actually felt like I was drafting. You know, for me, editing can be fun, but it's a bit more mathematic, it's more analytical, it's rare in the editing stage that I get into that flow state, you know, because you're not just writing a scene from scratch, you're piecing things together. But yesterday I had such a great day of editing that I felt like flow state of writing, even on revision, which is really rare. Like, it was a really kind of exhilarating day of writing where I took a chapter that felt very underwritten. Like, the scenes were all super short, and it was actually like some really juicy developments happened in the plot in this chapter, but it just felt underbaked, really, really underbaked. I think some of the writing that came out on this revision as I was fleshing out these scenes, it almost felt like instead of editing the scenes, I was just drafting over them. It really felt like some of the most nuanced, insightful writing in the book, and it was so exciting. Kind of an up and down draft. Some things I think I'm really thrilled by. There are also some really big lingering developmental concerns. Right now the book is 21 chapters in 6 parts, alternating 3 and 4 chapters each, which actually wasn't planned, that symmetry, but it just worked out that way. I think I'm going to remove the part structure and title the chapters. So this was actually my initial plan for the book, was not to have it divided into any kind of parts and title the chapters, because I really like titling chapters. I think it makes my chapters more cohesive. That's something that I want more from this book, is more cohesive thematic chapter work. Chapter titles actually really help with that. And I had divided the book into parts because it really, really helped me with my drafting process. But I don't think in the actual formatted, printed, published book, it needs to be separated into parts, given that the book is in such a compact time frame, and I would rather it read as just one smooth continuous arc. So over the next draft, I'm gonna start piecing together, I think, the chapter titles.
Hello there. Sorry the sun is so bright in the corner. The draft a few days ago. I don't actually remember when it was. The last chapter of the book is pretty underwhelming, not gonna lie. It's like one of my major problem spots is the last chapter. So I just kind of skimmed it and didn't really make any edits and was just like, yeah, this needs to go. In a lot of ways, I've really made great strides with the book. 1 year ago, I was about 20k into the draft, 10 or 20k into the draft, I don't even remember. I couldn't get it to work, and I was almost to the point of giving up. Now, I have a full draft of the book, and on this past draft, I think I've done some really good work on it. Rather than get the entirety of the book closer to being done, I don't know how close it is. Let's say 70%. Because, you know, they say the last like 10 or 20% feels like the last 80%, which I think is true. So I think the majority of the work has been done. Right now, I'd say about a third of the scenes feel like incredible. And by incredible, I mean that they surprised me. Those scenes were fully and even beyond fully convincing me of their realness, you know, in those moments. The characters in those scenes feel so real, so fully rendered that I have no doubt that it's real. Now, will that translate to a reader? I don't know. Especially at this point, in conjunction with the weaker scenes, I don't know. But to me, it's like there are these certain scenes, and probably about a third of the book, where it was like, wow, I felt so deeply convinced by the existence of these people in these moments. It's awesome. There's probably about another third of the book where it feels kind of in the middle. And then there's probably, I don't know if it's a third, it might be even a little less than a third of the book that's kind of at the end of that, where it just feels
fully unconvinced, like I'm not yet convinced by it. And if I'm not convinced by its existence and its realness, given that I created it in my mind, then I really don't think it's going to feel that convincing to a reader. Some big changes I want to make. I'm going to edit out a whole plot thread, so that's the big one, and make some pretty big changes to some of the structuring and more removing stuff, actually. Just one character who is staying in the book, has to stay in the book, really fundamental character who I don't feel that character or relationship is as, I feel like there's just some stuff that hasn't revealed itself yet to me. So it needs another big draft, and then it probably needs one more draft after that, like a lighter draft. And then I think it can start going to feedback. Was, I think, an impactful draft. I think just because there are pockets of the story that feel really underwhelming and underdeveloped, those are like bothering me. I'm gonna take a little break from it now. I have a short story to edit. I had a workshop, which I haven't had a workshop in so long, and it was so nice to workshop again. Like, it was great. I love workshopping so much. I feel like workshopping regularly really makes me more creative. I think if I can fix these issues on the next draft, I think I'll feel really, really happy about it and be ready and excited to get some feedback on it. And I think that's what this book needs, is some feedback, because it's gotten so interpersonally intricate with the character relationships. What it really needs is other people's interpretations for that.
I had said earlier in the vlog that looking at the rest of my year, it was kind of going to be like alternating between a draft of this and a draft of Holding a Ghost. It was hard to really plan out because it was going to depend on how extensive the edits on Holding a Ghost were going to be. I talked about that book with my agent last week because she finished reading it. There are barely any edits. She was basically like, it's great, it's fantastic. There's really just one really, really small edit, and I'm gonna get the final version of the draft to her in a couple days. I've been really thrilled lately seeing my work get to the later stages. A lot of stuff that I've been working on for a really long time is nearing that really late stage of completion. Is really satisfying. It's making me feel even more motivated to get the animal sense there, especially because I'm seeing myself being able to get work there a little bit faster than it used to take me. I just really want to see those issues fixed so that I can really feel proud of the draft and, you know, start getting some feedback on it. I really need to see how some of the relationships are conveying to people and if they're conveying the way that I want. And I feel like I'm losing track of what I want in a few cases because I really like chapter titles. My last two books have chapter titles. My next book has chapter titles. I think they help me with cohesive chapter work as well. I had initially wanted to title the chapters, but then I just was struggling to title them. What I was lacking was a pattern of like how I was going to title the chapters, but I decided that I wanted to title them all after like new age concepts. A few of them are named actually after tarot cards. I'm really happy with that, and I think it helps with something that I wanted, which was for the book to have a stronger vibe. You guys know me, I will refer to myself as like a no plot, just vibes writer, but I feel like this book didn't have as strong of a vibe or an aesthetic, so I really wanted to cast this aesthetic of like this kind of weird, kind of new agey vibe, which I think was a little hard because the main character doesn't really believe in that stuff. It's their parents that do, but it's a really prevalent part of the main character's life. I think it's a vehicle for a lot of the thematic work that's in the story. Other characters kind of play into this even if they're not like in a literal new age cult like the parents are. One of the main characters in the book, Susanna, she's like the most important side character. It's often referenced that she's reading like pop psychology and she talks about like the law of attraction. I really wanted this sense of kind of like uneasy, weird new age spiritualism to be really cast over the story, and I think that using the chapter titles would really help with that. I've also started making some notes about some of the bigger changes that I want. You know, I'm removing a thread, which is the main thing, and then there are just a couple other points where I want to do some condensing work, and you know, I'm happy with those changes. I think for me really the big missing question is the ending. I know the ending of the book, like in terms of how all the main threads, how everything kind of culminates and boils over. I'm struggling to identify what I want to show, where the character is, like kind of after the dust settles, you know? Where are they going to be going forward? I kind of do know, but I don't really know how I can construct a scene that's going to like showcase what I want to showcase. And I have a few ideas, but they don't all feel quite right. So continuing on with this editing vlog, I haven't really, I wouldn't say begun working on this next draft of the book, which I guess would be draft 4 intensively. Like I'm not really working on it every day or anything just because I have some other things on the go right now. So instead I'm just kind of chipping away at it. So what I did, because I wanted to get like a good sense of my progress for the book, is I made a chart of all of the chapters in the book, marked them based on how close I think they are to done. So complete chapters are basically like, I think this is an incredible chapter, every scene's a banger, doesn't need any more work. And then a strong chapter was like, this is good, I think a lot of this is going well here, it either just needs more like detail work or just some final polishing, or maybe like one of the scenes needs some attention. And then an okay scene is a scene that's like kind of in the middle, like it has some significant issues that I need to attend to, but it doesn't need like a full overhaul. And then there were just a few chapters that I marked as weak, which are basically chapters that need like a massive rethink. So I'll actually show you what this looks like because it doesn't spoil anything. It's just a list of the chapters.
I think for this next draft, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to do it linearly. I think I'm going to today maybe look at a few of the chapters that I have marked as strong that I think are almost there. Like chapter 2 I wanted to look at. I think I can get chapter 2 to complete today. Like it's just like a tiny bit of detailing work. At a certain point I need to really look at this one. This needs a pretty big rethink because I removed a lot of the content from that chapter, and so I think I need to dissolve the chapter and like move the lingering scenes into other chapters, or I need to replace it with something, and I'm leaning towards replacing it with something. I think this is where the risk of the biggest lull in pacing in the book is. So I think if I could add like some kind of support beam event here that was like maybe higher in intensity, I think it would be really good for the book. Eventually I'm gonna have to deal with like through here we have a lot of like weaker chapters. Oh, I spelled consciousness wrong. Like I think the plot is really ramping up through this section in a way that I think is exciting, but I think the actual scene and chapter work on the page is kind of weak. Like some of the chapters I don't feel like have a really clear arc or chapter structure. I have a lot of chapters as complete. Hopefully a lot of these okay chapters are at strong, and I can get them to an even more polished version on that next draft.
So I think this vlog has been going on for like 4 months at this point. It's out of control. It's the new year and I'm finally getting back into working on my revisions. Hadn't been working on it for the past little while. I had some applications to do and I had a busy holiday. Took a little break. I went on a little trip with my girlfriend. I visited my family over Christmas, so I wasn't really writing. I have gotten back into working on the animal sense and it is my focus for now. Right now I'm working on a draft where I'm really focusing on the book chapter by chapter. And so I haven't been working through it completely linearly. I have been jumping around a little bit, just because I'm kind of leaving the most significant edits until the end. I kind of view editing drafts in 2 different types. There are like localized drafts and then there are holistic drafts. So the first few drafts of edits are usually more holistic, where I'm looking at the book as a whole. And then I get to the point where instead of looking at the book as a whole, I'm looking at it in terms of like the localized parts. So instead of thinking about how do I make this like a cohesive, strong whole work, I'm asking myself, how do I fix this chapter or how do I fix this scene? And then after a draft like that, I do a holistic draft. And so it starts kind of alternating. So I'm now at the point where it's kind of an alternating, like a parts focused draft and then like a holistic focused draft. So this is the first more parts focused draft. I'm really looking at it from the chapter sense. Almost feels like I'm just editing a bunch of little short stories. You know, once I'm done this draft, there will be a draft where I focus on the story as a whole. As you can see, it is snowing. I'm just out on a little snowy walk, short snowy walk because it's cold out. The chapter that I've been struggling with, there was a chapter, Bad Kid, and I liked a lot of what was in that chapter, but there were 2 scenes that were really giving me trouble. Originally, there's just way too much going on. I really settled on a structure for this chapter, which I like. I like moved everything that was kind of muddling the structure of this chapter, but there were just 2 scenes that I was struggling with. One was a scene where the main character, the 2 primary characters of the story, actually get into like an argument. I think it just felt like it came out of nowhere. That scene needed to serve a specific role in the chain of events of this relationship and the development of this relationship, but it wasn't really serving that. Like they needed to have an argument and there needed to be some tensions brought up to fulfill this development in the relationship that I needed, but the scene itself just wasn't really doing that correctly. The conversation just wasn't really fulfilling that purpose. It felt pretty out of nowhere. Finally got that chapter where I needed it to be, and it feels, I think, natural and much more compelling now. And then there was also a flashback. I had written this flashback in revision because I needed to flesh out area of the backstory, and it's still the area of the book that I'm struggling with the most. The thing is, I ended up really liking this scene. It just didn't really touch on what the thing that I kind of needed it to. With some more reflection, I think I was able to flesh it out and have it tap into a really important tension point. Fits actually really nicely thematically into that chapter. So now I am working on a chapter that is one of the chapters that I'm struggling with more. I've kind of been working on a lot of the chapters that were lighter in terms of work. Like I showed you my chart, it's color coded. This is one of the weaker chapters because the overall structure just feels quite haphazard. It's a chapter that I cut several scenes from. Now it feels like it just doesn't have a clear arc. I like some of the individual scenes, but the structure of the chapter as a whole is not strong. It touches on a lot of different arcs of the story, but it doesn't have a super clear arc itself. I think I have realized what the core of this chapter is, and so I think what I really need to do is synchronize that idea across all of the relationships that the chapter is touching on, and then I think the chapter will feel cohesive and it'll have a clear arc. So I'm just gonna close out this vlog now because I was just editing it back last night and it's like an hour long. So I've made quite a lot of progress. There are a few chapters that I've downgraded, like having looked at them more closely, I realized that they actually needed a lot of work, and so I bumped them down to weak, but I've definitely made a lot of progress, especially in the first half. So right now I'm really looking at the two chapters 11 and 13, harmonic convergence and psychic birth, and I feel those chapters are a significant weak point in the book. The way one of the subplots is handled across those two chapters feels just very inconsequential. So I'm really looking at those two chapters right now and trying to fix them up. I'm doing quite a bit of rearranging there, but overall I feel like I'm making pretty good progress. This is definitely turning into a more intensive draft than I was thinking that it was going to be. At this point, you know, I wanted to be starting the first draft of my next project, which I'm not going to do until this is kind of done, this edit, and so that's looking like it's not going to happen until later in the year than I thought. I was wanting that to happen right at the beginning of the year, so I would really like to get these two drafts that I'm working on done before I leave for I'm doing a big trip to Southeast Asia, so I'd really like to get these done before then. That just seems like a natural deadline for me to impose. That's about it for now. It's just turning into a much more intensive draft than I thought it was going to be, because I feel like as I make changes, I keep realizing more changes that I need to make. It's like one piece fits into place and it makes me realize that something else needs work. Anyways, it's been a whole thing. This has been quite an intensive editing draft. It's the most like purely character-driven book that I've ever written, and it just feels like there's nothing to hide behind. The character work is quite intricate and the relationship work is quite intricate, but then it's a matter of taking this very intricate, messy group of people and then presenting it in a way that's comprehensible to the reader, and that's just turning out to be quite a challenge. But anyways, I've made good progress on it. So I'm gonna close out this vlog. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!